The return to Ferdium brought visible relief to everyone in Gislin's party. The trip itself had not been long, but every moment spent outside their own lands carried tension. Only after crossing back into Ferdium did the group finally seem able to breathe properly again. The familiar cold air, the worn stone roads, and the sight of the old houses somehow felt comforting, despite their rough state. Only Jillian remained unreadable. His sharp eyes moved across every corner of the estate as they rode, silently taking in the cracked roofs, the faded walls, and the thin crowds in the streets. Gislin noticed and asked him what he thought after seeing Ferdium with his own eyes. At first, Jillian gave the polite kind of answer expected from a subordinate, but Gislin pressed him for honesty. After a pause, Jillian spoke bluntly. The houses were old, barely maintained, and the whole estate looked poor. Worse, there were hardly any young men in sight. Gislin didn't take offense. Instead, he admitted the truth with bitter calm. Ferdium was poor, painfully poor. The people lived from one day to the next, earning barely enough to survive. Most of the able-bodied young men had been swallowed by endless military service on the northern front, leaving too few hands to work the fields. Less farming meant less tax revenue, which meant less money to maintain the army, which in turn made the territory weaker. It was a vicious cycle that had trapped the estate for generations. Gislin explained further as they rode slowly through the worn streets. The army's equipment was outdated. Supplies were always delayed. Without support from other territories, Ferdium would have collapsed long ago. And even that support came with conditions. It was only enough to keep the front alive, never enough to strengthen the people themselves. Jillian quickly grasped the true depth of the problem. This wasn't simply a poor estate. It was a land being bled dry by necessity. To make matters worse, Ferdium also had to station troops near the Forest of Beasts in the northwest, guarding against monsters that could emerge at any time. That meant even more soldiers tied up in endless defensive positions. The estate was fighting two wars at once, with barbarians in the north and monsters in the forest. No wonder there was no room for growth. Jillian honestly remarked that inheriting such a territory seemed like inheriting endless suffering. Gislin simply smiled. He said he would fix it. Not with small improvements, not with temporary relief. He would end Ferdium's poverty completely. To Jillian, it sounded like the confidence of youth, almost impossible in the face of such overwhelming problems. But Gislin's conviction never wavered. He alone knew the future, and that knowledge gave him a certainty no one else could understand. Once they reached the castle, Gislin moved quickly. He instructed Belinda to arrange rooms for Jillian and Rachel and ensure Rachel's medicine continued daily. Jillian was told to remain in the castle until proper accommodations could be prepared. Then Gislin headed straight toward the Lord's Hall. As he stood outside the door, he heard the voices of the estate's core retainers already in discussion. The mood inside was grim. Aid from Raypole had been reduced, and the treasury was no longer capable of maintaining the current military force. Albert, the treasurer, explained in his usual cold manner that troop reductions were becoming unavoidable. Randolph, the knight commander, strongly opposed it. Reducing forces would weaken the northern line, creating openings for barbarian raids. But there was no clear solution. Homern, the steward, revealed that Raypole itself had begun increasing military spending and stockpiling food, which only deepened the concern. Even Ferdium's most loyal veterans had reached the point where options were running out. Gislin listened from outside with a faint smile and explained quietly to Jillian that these men were more than retainers. They were sworn brothers to his father, men who had endured hardship beside him for decades. Then after taking a steadying breath, he pushed open the heavy doors. Inside sat the core of Ferdium. Homern, the half-bald steward. Albert, the ever-stern treasurer. Randolph, the broad-bearded knight commander. And at the center, his father, Zwalter Ferdium. The moment Gislin saw him, everything else disappeared from his mind. In this life, it had only been a short time since they last met. But to the Gislin, who had lived an entire lifetime as the king of mercenaries, it had been decades. The sight of his father, alive and exactly as he remembered, struck him harder than any battlefield wound ever had. For a long moment, he could only stare. The stern face he had once taken for granted now felt unbearably precious. He had spent his previous life believing he could always come back home someday, only to realize too late that home had already vanished. That pain still lived deep within him. His voice trembled as he spoke a single word. Father. The emotion in that one word was enough to make even the room's tense atmosphere pause. But Zwalter, unaware of the storm in his son's heart, only looked slightly confused by Gislin's strange expression and moist eyes. After clearing his throat, he finally spoke in his usual blunt way. I heard you went out. What happened with Count Raypold's daughter? At his father's question, Gislin finally forced the storm of emotions inside him into order. He straightened his posture, lifted his chin, and answered in a steady voice that carried far more composure than he actually felt. He told Zwalter there had been no particular issue and that he had merely gone to discuss a few matters with Amelia. The moment those words left his mouth, a subtle glimmer passed through Zwalter's sharp eyes. That alone was unusual. Since childhood, Gislin had always been the one running away from his father, disappearing whenever he was called, hiding behind excuses, or only appearing when he had been dragged back after causing some disaster. Yet now he had come here on his own, standing calmly in front of the entire hall. More than that, there was an unfamiliar confidence in the way he carried himself. To Zwalter, it almost felt as though the sun standing before him wore Gislin's face, but not quite the same spirit. Suspicion naturally followed. Zwalter silently looked him over from head to toe, his stern expression tightening just a little. Something was definitely different. The silence stretched until the atmosphere itself grew heavy, and Gislin, sensing that tension, spoke first to keep the moment from hardening further. He said he had heard about the latest battle, and that his father must have gone through a lot defending the estate once again. Zwalter answered in the same blunt tone Gislin remembered so well, saying that he should have pushed the barbarians back completely, but had been forced to stop because of the estate's worsening circumstances. Even so, he had inflicted enough damage to buy some time, and once he finished reorganizing and resting, he intended to head north again. Hearing those words, Gislin quietly studied his father's face. To everyone else, it was the same rigid, emotionless expression as always. But now he could see the truth beneath it: fatigue, responsibility, and the burden of carrying an entire land on his shoulders. In his youth, Gislin had hated that face. He had seen it as cold, humorless, and uncaring. He had envied the sons of other nobles who lived surrounded by comfort and luxury, wondering why only Ferdium had to endure endless hardship. Now, after living a life where he had wandered battlefields with no home to return to, he understood what his father had truly sacrificed. The piece of the estate, meager as it was, existed only because Zwalter had never once allowed himself to bend. That realization left Gislin briefly lost in thought until his father's voice cut through it once more, asking about the incident with Jamal and Philip. He had already heard the rumors that Gislin himself had dealt with the traitorous knights, and now he wanted the truth. Before Gislin could fully answer, Randolph leaned forward and pressed him directly, asking if he had truly killed them himself. Gislin chose his words carefully and said that he had not killed all of them by himself. The retainers immediately nodded, visibly relieved by an answer that sounded more believable. Of course, none of them had seriously accepted the rumor that the old Gislin could single-handedly cut down trained knights. Randolph pressed further, asking if the knights had fought among themselves first. Gislin confirmed that they had, which was technically true. And when Randolph concluded that Gislin had simply finished what remained, Gislin allowed that interpretation to stand. It was close enough to the truth without forcing him to reveal more than necessary. Randolph accepted it with satisfaction, remarking that luck had been on Gislin's side, but that even so, standing his ground against knights had been no easy feat. Even Zwalter's stern face softened with the faintest hint of approval. To a son who had once been known only for disgrace, even staying to protect Elena rather than fleeing was enough to count as real growth. The conversation moved naturally toward the duel with Cain. Zwalter remarked that he had also heard Gislin had won and told him to continue training diligently. Gislin answered simply that he would. Then, as if right on cue, Homern stepped in with the lecture Gislin had heard countless times in both this life and the last. The steward reminded him of his duty as Ferdium's heir, the importance of dignity, and the honor of his grandfather's legacy. The speech threatened to go on forever, exactly as it always did. Gislin, who now understood better than anyone how much these men had endured because of his past recklessness, still found himself almost smiling at the familiarity of it. He cut Homern off politely, saying he understood and that there was no need to worry. The steward's face immediately tightened with displeasure, his old frustration toward Gislin resurfacing in full. Albert followed next, speaking only of finances as expected. He informed Gislin that his allowance would be reduced. In the past, such a statement would have led to shouting, cursing, and shameless demands for more. Instead, Gislin merely nodded and told him to go ahead. That easy acceptance only deepened Albert's suspicion. The treasurer said nothing more, but his eyes clearly showed he found this new behavior unsettling. One by one, the remaining retainers greeted Gislin with varying degrees of reluctance, each of them shaped by years of cleaning up the disasters left behind by the old hymn. Zwalter, watching the strained atmosphere, let out a tired breath before finally cutting through it all and asking what Gislin had truly come here for. Gislin's expression turned serious. This was the real purpose of his visit. He said there was something he wanted to do and that he needed his father's permission. The moment those words were spoken, the tension in the room sharpened. Zwalter's eyes narrowed warily, as if bracing for the next calamity. He even muttered that perhaps it would be better if Gislin simply did nothing at all, a remark that would have stung the old him, but now only drew an inward click of amusement. It was understandable. After everything he had done in the past, of course his father and the retainers would treat even his good intentions like the approach of a natural disaster. Gislin calmly repeated that what he wanted to do was necessary. After a long pause, Zwalter finally asked what it was. Gislin drew in a steady breath and declared that he intended to develop the Forest of Beasts. The reaction was immediate and absolute. Every face in the hall froze. Zwalter's brows twitched sharply, and even the usually composed retainers could not hide their disbelief. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The Forest of Beasts was one of the most dangerous regions tied to Ferdium, a sprawling northern wilderness packed with monsters so powerful that no full exploration had ever succeeded. Even Ferdium itself had long ago accepted that the best they could do was guard against the occasional beasts that emerged from it. To suggest developing it was not simply ambitious, it bordered on madness. When Homern finally found his voice, he repeated the words as if unable to believe he had heard them correctly. Gislin remained completely calm. He explained that he would take care of everything himself, and that all he required was permission to establish a garrison near the forest and gather the forces necessary to begin. The more casually he spoke, the more the disbelief in the room turned into agitation. Homern stared at him in utter disbelief and asked if he even understood what kind of place the Forest of Beasts truly was. Gislin answered without hesitation that he knew exactly what it was, a forest overflowing with dangerous monsters. That answer only made the retainers' murmurs swell further. To them, this was not the confidence of a young lord with a vision. It was yet another reckless catastrophe waiting to happen. Homern stiffened and reminded him that such a project was impossible to begin without approval, and that as the heir, he had no authority to establish garrisons or gather forces independently. Gislin answered evenly that this was precisely why he had come to seek permission from his father. It was that calm, almost matter-of-fact confidence that finally broke Homern's restraint. Years of frustration, endless lectures wasted on deaf ears, and memories of every disaster Gislin had caused came crashing together at once. Before Zwalter could even respond, the steward exploded, his voice ringing through the hall as he demanded to know if Gislin had gone completely insane and why he would ever think of doing such a thing. The moment Homern's voice exploded through the hall, whatever little calm remained shattered completely. It didn't matter that Zwalter and all the senior retainers were present. The steward could no longer restrain himself. In his eyes, this was no ordinary reckless idea. All the previous disasters Gislin had caused, gambling away money, setting fires, destroying equipment, those had been terrible, yes, but they were still the kind of damage an estate could somehow recover from. The Forest of Beasts was different. Stirring that place was like kicking open the gates of hell itself. If they provoked the monsters inside and they flooded into Ferdium, the entire territory could be plunged into ruin overnight. Homern's words came out harsher and harsher, completely abandoning any sense of courtesy toward the young lord. He demanded to know whether Ghislain truly understood why the forest had always been left untouched. That place was a complete loss, a zone everyone with sense had learned to avoid. Touching it brought no guaranteed gain, only the certainty that monsters would pour out and threaten the villages. To him, the very thought of development was madness. What shocked Ghislain more than the anger itself was that no one in the room even seemed to care that Homern had just shouted at the air with such disrespect. That alone told him exactly how little trust he had built over the years. Albert joined in next, but in his usual colder, more analytical manner. His sharp eyes immediately reduced the problem into numbers. The Forest of Beasts had already been deemed worthless by generations before them because the monster density made exploration and resource gathering impossible. Even if valuable materials existed inside, the cost of securing them, protecting workers, and replacing inevitable casualties would be greater than anything the estate could ever recover. Randolph, too, snorted in open disbelief, remarking that Ghislain seemed to be overestimating himself simply because he had won one duel against Cain. To Randolph, this looked like the arrogance of a boy who had tasted a tiny bit of success and mistaken it for invincibility. Ghislain clicked his tongue inwardly. Opposition had been expected, but even he had underestimated how absolute it would be. All three of his father's sworn brothers had immediately united against the idea, and with them opposing him so fiercely, there was no realistic way to gain their support through ordinary persuasion. As he remained silent, weighing his next words, Homern only became more agitated. His face reddened further, and the dam of old resentment finally burst wide open. He demanded to know why Ghislain was always so desperate to poke into places he shouldn't. Randolph tried to calm him, quietly tugging at his sleeve and telling him he was getting too worked up, but Homern ignored him completely. Years of frustration now spilled out all at once. He began listing every catastrophe Ghislain had caused in the past, each one worse than the last. He reminded everyone how Ghislain had once secretly sold military provisions just to get gambling money, how he had nearly set the city gates ablaze out of sheer bad temper, how he had butchered a precious war horse simply because he craved meat, and how he had once melted down the knight's armor in some absurd attempt to forge a legendary sword. The more Homern listed, the more awkward Ghislain's expression became. The memories were so distant to him now that they felt like incidents from another person's life. In truth, they practically were. To everyone in the room, however, these were still fresh scars left by the same troublesome air standing before them. Ghislain could only avoid their gazes and inwardly grimace. Did I really go that far? The answer, judging by the room's reaction, was undeniably yes. Homern's tirade finally reached its peak when he demanded to know just how much bigger a mess Ghislain intended to create this time. The Forest of Beasts was not just another prank gone wrong. It was the kind of gamble that could destroy the estate itself. Trying to salvage the atmosphere, Ghislain forced a sincere tone and assured them that nothing like his past mistakes would happen again. He even added a small smile and asked whether they trusted him now. That only made matters worse. Homern nearly staggered, clutching the back of his neck in disbelief, unable to comprehend how Ghislain could still smile in a moment like this. At that point, Zwalter finally intervened with a quieter but far more grounded question. He asked whether Ghislain's true purpose was simply to make money. Ghislain answered honestly that it was. Right now, the only potentially valuable resource Ferdium possessed was that forest. Zwalter did not deny it. In fact, he admitted that previous generations had already considered the same possibility. The problem was that no one had ever been able to justify the cost. Without certainty that valuable resources truly existed inside, they could not afford to throw soldiers into the jaws of monsters on a gamble. And even if such certainty existed, the estate no longer had the manpower or money to attempt it. Ghislain nodded, already expecting that answer. That was precisely why he said he intended to proceed without relying on the estate's resources. In his mind, the reasoning was crystal clear. If Ferdium was ever going to become economically independent, They needed a stable source of wealth that neighboring estates could not manipulate. In his previous life, Ferdium had eventually collapsed because its poverty made it utterly dependent on outside aid. The moment that aid vanished, the estate's fate had been sealed. If he wanted to prevent the future, he remembered, securing income from the Forest of Beasts was non-negotiable. Unfortunately, none of that knowledge existed for Zwalter or the others. What they saw instead was their troublesome heir making another impossible promise. Zwalter immediately asked the practical question, what exactly did Gislen plan to do without money or troops? Gislen replied with the same unwavering confidence that had already driven everyone else to the edge. He said he would secure both the funds and the manpower himself. He understood the estate had nothing to spare. All he needed was permission to build a base in the territory and recruit forces on his own. That answer only drew more disbelief. Albert immediately questioned what money Gislen could possibly be talking about. Development on that scale required far more than a noble's allowance. Gislen only repeated that he would handle the money himself. Albert nearly laughed aloud. From the treasurer's point of view, Gislen's words made it obvious he had no real concept of how much such a project would cost. In Albert's mind, the only plausible explanation was that the young lord was seriously considering robbery. Before the treasurer could continue, Homern cut back in with open desperation. At this point, his anger had transformed into something closer to pleading. He begged Gislen to simply stay put, to stop exhausting everyone, and to just sit still for once in his life. The other retainers silently nodded, clearly sharing the same exhausted wish. Gislen crossed his arms and let out a slow breath. At this point, even he recognized that persuasion was pointless. Their reaction was colder than he had expected, but in hindsight, it made perfect sense. This was not simply about the absurdity of developing the forest. It was about the fact that he was the one asking. In their eyes, he was still a reckless heir who had never once given them a reason to trust him. No argument, no logic, no promise would overcome years of disaster and resentment in a single conversation. In his previous life, he would have simply broken the opposition through force. Anyone who challenged his decisions would have been crushed until the results silenced them. But this was not the battlefield, and these were not mercenaries. These were the people who had kept his family alive through impossible hardship. So he stopped trying to convince the retainers and turned instead to the only opinion that truly mattered. Zwalter was rubbing his eyes, the exhaustion on his face impossible to hide now. For a fleeting moment, he reflected bitterly on how happy he had initially felt that Gislen had come to him on his own. That feeling had evaporated within minutes. His son had indeed come of his own accord, only to request permission to cause what might become the greatest disaster yet. After a long silence, Zwalter finally gave his answer. I cannot allow it. If the forest is provoked and the monsters come flooding out, the damage to the estate would be catastrophic. Gislen simply nodded. Well, there's nothing I can do about that. Understood. The calmness of that response threw the entire room into confusion. Zwalter himself blinked in disbelief. Gislen had never been someone who accepted rejection so easily. If words alone could make him back down, he never would have earned his reputation in the first place. Yet here he was, accepting the refusal without even the slightest protest. The retainers stared at him with equal suspicion. Gislen only grinned lightly and said it had been nice seeing everyone again after so long before turning away. As he left the hall, Homern shouted after him in panic, warning that if he caused another disaster, they would lock him in the tower for real this time. Gislen only waved him off without looking back. Once they had moved far enough from the great hall, Jillian quietly tried to comfort him, assuming he must be disappointed after such total rejection. Gislen looked at him with a completely carefree expression and asked why he would be disappointed at all. Then he casually revealed the truth. He had never come there expecting approval in the first place. Whether they granted permission or not, he had already intended to move forward. Asking had merely been courtesy. Since the answer was no, all that meant was that he would simply force the matter through results instead. Jillian was left speechless. The Lord himself had forbidden it, yet Gislen was talking as if that changed absolutely nothing. When Jillian anxiously pointed out how dangerous it would be to proceed against a direct order, Ghislaine merely grinned and said that as long as he succeeded, the results would justify everything. Then he finally explained the practical side. He already had the starting capital. His wealthy fiancée, as he put it with shameless amusement, had given him a generous breakup gift. The money extorted from Amelia would become the seed fund for the project. Jillian could only stare in disbelief. In noble society, a broken engagement was a stain on one's pride. Yet Ghislaine spoke of it almost proudly, as if he had won some kind of prize. Then Ghislaine revealed the rest of the plan. For manpower, he would hire mercenaries. Since he could not openly raise a private force within the estate, mercenaries were the cleanest solution. When Jillian asked how many, Ghislaine answered immediately. 200. The sheer scale of it stunned Jillian. That was enough men to resemble the beginning of a territorial war. But Ghislaine's resolve never wavered. He said plainly that it did not matter who opposed him. This was something Ferdium needed, and therefore something he would do. At that point, Jillian understood that no amount of caution would change his master's mind. All he could do was ensure Ghislaine survived what came next. When Ghislaine finally asked which small mercenary corps source in the north had the best skills, Jillian's expression changed. After a moment of thought, realization struck him. Surely Ghislaine wasn't talking about them. Ghislaine answered with a sharp, dangerous smile. That's right, the Cerberus Mercenary Corps. Let's see if we can put a leash on those mad dogs. By the time Belinda stormed into the room, Ghislaine and Jillian were already preparing to leave again. Her face was tight with frustration, and the speed at which she had arrived made it obvious the rumors were spreading fast across the estate. She didn't even bother with formalities before demanding what in the world he meant by developing the Forest of Beasts. Adding that word was already going around that the young lord had nearly caused another disaster. Ghislaine, however, greeted her with the same calm ease as always, almost as if he had been expecting her. In fact, he admitted that her timing was perfect, because he had been planning to find her anyway. Before she could continue scolding him, he immediately began assigning tasks in a matter-of-fact tone, telling her to gather laborers, arrange for a base large enough to hold around 300 people near the forest, and secure food, lumber, and building materials. He casually added that it would cost a fair amount, as though he were discussing a normal household errand rather than a secret military-style operation against his father's direct orders. Belinda stared at him in stunned disbelief before slowly asking the obvious question. Hadn't Lord Ferdium explicitly forbidden this? Ghislaine answered with shameless honesty that yes, his father had forbidden it, but he was simply planning to do it in secret anyway, so he needed her help. The innocence in his smile only made the situation worse. Her disbelief quickly turned into outrage, and she demanded to know why, after years of causing manageable small-scale trouble, he had suddenly decided to escalate into something this massive. She bitterly regretted ever thinking his recent changes meant he had matured into someone more dependable. Instead, it seemed his ability to cause chaos had simply expanded along with his confidence. Ghislaine, unfazed by her anger, only shrugged and replied that if she truly didn't want to help, that was fine. But then he smoothly added that even without her support, he would proceed alone. And if he entered the forest unprepared, there was a very real chance he might die. Then came the final push. Was she really prepared to let him go into a monster-infested forest with no proper supplies? That twisted logic cornered her perfectly. Belinda immediately threatened to report everything to Lord Ferdium, but Ghislaine anticipated even that. He reminded her that Homern had already promised to lock him in the tower if he caused trouble again. And if she told his father, that was exactly what would happen. In that case, he said with alarming cheerfulness, he would simply have no choice but to run away and perhaps do something even more outrageous out of anger, like setting the forest on fire instead. The mere suggestion horrified her, and she nearly shouted at him for even saying something so insane where others might hear. Yet Ghislaine continued with disturbing playfulness, musing aloud that if he couldn't enter the forest, burning it down might be entertaining instead. Perhaps even inviting Scobin and Ricardo to join him. At that point, Belinda realized what he was doing. It was less a direct threat and more a weaponized possibility, forcing her to choose between helping him prepare responsibly or risking something far worse. Eventually, after enough pleading mixed with reckless what-ifs, Belinda's resistance broke. She let out a long, exhausted sigh and admitted that he had indeed grown, but perhaps far too much in exactly the wrong direction. Ghislaine, of course, took it as praise. Once she reluctantly agreed to arrange the labors and construction materials. He thanked her with an almost infuriating brightness before announcing that he and Jillian would head out immediately to recruit mercenaries. Though she couldn't accompany him this time, she reassured herself that Jillian's presence would at least keep him alive. With that, the two men departed Ferdium and made for the neighboring Zimbar estate, where the largest concentration of mercenaries in the region could be found. Once they arrived in Zimbar, they headed straight for the mercenary guild. The guildmaster, a seasoned man in his 50s, listened carefully as Ghislaine explained that intended to hire men for the development of the Forest of Beasts. The old man's curiosity was immediate. He asked why anyone would attempt something so dangerous and uncertain, especially in a territory as poor as Ferdium. Ghislaine, unwilling to waste time, curtly replied that explanations weren't necessary for a paid contract. When pressed further about his identity, he revealed the Ferdium crest and introduced himself as Ghislain Ferdium, heir to the estate. The guildmaster instantly recognized the name behind his professional smile. Internally, he was already thinking that this must be the infamous, reckless young lord everyone had heard rumors about. Still, mercenary work was mercenary work. As long as the client paid, it was not the guild's business whether the job was genius or madness. The guildmaster explained that because the assignment involved an uncharted monster forest, there would be additional hazard pay. Ghislaine accepted immediately and instructed him to prioritize hiring individual mercenaries over large established groups, limiting group contracts to teams smaller than 30 men if necessary. The reason was simple. Individuals were cheaper and smaller groups were easier to control. After finalizing that arrangement, Ghislaine casually asked about the Cerberus Mercenary Corps. The moment he heard the name, the guildmaster's face soured. He referred to them as a pack of mad dogs and strongly advised against hiring them. Their rates were low because their mission success rate was terrible, not due to lack of skill, but because they were so volatile and destructive that jobs often swirled out of control. Ghislaine, however, remained firm. Skill was what he needed, and in a monster-filled forest, being rough around the edges was more asset than liability. Realizing he wouldn't change his mind, the guildmaster finally scribbled their location on a slip of paper and warned him not to come back complaining later. The Cerberus Mercenary Corps was camped outside the city in a miserable cluster of dirty tents. The sight alone was enough to make Ghislaine whistle in amusement. Some of the men were gambling, others were sprawled half asleep in the dirt, and none of them looked as though they had bathed in weeks. Their gear was worn, their clothes stained yellow with age and sweat, and even from a distance, the camp radiated the smell of neglect and danger. One mercenary lounging nearby lazily noticed their approach and, after half-heartedly recognizing them as nobles, asked what they wanted. Ghislaine simply requested to see their leader. The man, without even standing, told him the boss was busy and to come back tomorrow. To Jillian's surprise, Ghislaine accepted without protest and walked away. The same thing repeated the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each visit ended with the same lazy dismissal and the same mocking smirks from the mercenaries. By the fifth day, one of them finally hinted that if Ghislaine wanted to see the leader, perhaps he should show a little sincerity. Ghislaine calmly tossed him a gold coin. The mercenary's eyes widened greedily, but instead of relenting, he decided to push further, claiming even that wasn't enough and telling the noble to come back tomorrow with more. The surrounding mercenaries laughed openly, delighted by how easily they seemed to be toying with this young aristocrat. Jillian was nearly boiling over, fully aware they were testing Ghislaine to establish dominance before any contract was even discussed. But Ghislaine only smiled thinly and said that as a guest, he had shown all the courtesy he was willing to offer. Tomorrow, he said, would be their last chance. When the next day came, the same mercenary greeted them with the same smug expression and an outstretched hand, clearly expecting more money. This time, Ghislaine's expression didn't change, but his tone sharpened. He said evenly that he had already shown more than enough respect, and now they would start with a leg. The shift was so sudden it stunned everyone around them. Before the mercenary could process the words, Jillian moved. With a savage grin, he seized the man by the throat in one hand. The mercenary instantly panicked, cursing and pulling a dagger from his chest in an attempt to stab him. He never got the chance. There was a brutal crack of bone, followed by a scream that tore through the entire camp as Jillian snapped the man's leg with horrifying ease, finally making it clear that Gislin's patience had ended, and the mad dogs were about to learn exactly what kind of master had come to leash them. The moment the mercenary's scream tore through the camp, the entire atmosphere shifted. The man collapsed into the dirt, clutching his shattered leg, writhing in agony from Jillian's effortless strike. What had begun as mockery instantly transformed into murderous hostility. 5 other mercenaries who had been lounging nearby slowly rose to their feet, their expressions darkening as they let dangerous intent seep into the air. One spat out that these bastards had clearly lost their minds just because they were nobles, while another sneered that Cerberus wasn't the kind of group to cower before aristocrats. Their reputation as the Mad Dogs of the North wasn't just an empty nickname. They were notorious precisely because they would draw steel over the slightest insult. Noble status be damned. That was why they constantly clashed with employers, and why so many contracts involving them ended in disaster. They were skilled, fearless, and utterly impossible to control. Gislin watched their reaction with a cruel, satisfied smile. To him, this only confirmed what he had already believed. These men were exactly the kind of reckless beasts he needed to hurl into the Forest of Peace. Against monsters that knew nothing of fear or reason, ordinary disciplined soldiers would hesitate. Men like these, however, rough, violent, and just unstable enough to thrive in chaos, were perfect. He calmly glanced at Jillian and gave a simple order not to kill them. Jillian obeyed instantly. What followed was hardly a fight. The 5 mad dogs, each skilled enough to rival knights in training, rushed him together, only to be dismantled in moments. Arms twisted, legs snapped, bodies thrown into the dirt before they could even process what had happened. It was such a one-sided display of dominance that the remaining mercenaries, including those dragged from sleep by the commotion, crawled out of their tents gripping weapons and formed a circle around Gislin and Jillian. The mood in the camp turned vicious. Threats flew from every direction, promising they wouldn't leave in one piece and reminding them that this camp sat far enough outside the city that bodies could vanish without a trace. Yet the more they surrounded him, the more Gislin seemed amused. What pleased him most was not their aggression, but the way their eyes had changed. They were no longer looking at Jillian as prey to be mocked. Instead, they had instinctively shifted into a formation that acknowledged him as a dangerous predator. Even among madmen, there was enough battlefield instinct left to cooperate when genuine danger appeared. Gislin recognized the value in that immediately. Their recklessness was troublesome, but in battle it could be shaped into strength. That, more than anything, explained why this dysfunctional mercenary corps had somehow survived. He casually told them to stop attacking and call their leader, adding that if he crippled every one of them, they'd be useless for the job he intended to offer. That only enraged them further. Several barked that they should just carve him up on the spot, while others tightened the circle with clear killing intent. Jillian slowly drew the sword at his waist, already concluding that the Cerberus mercenary corps was beyond salvaging, and that exterminating them all might be the cleaner solution. The camp's isolated location certainly made that easy. But just as the tension reached its breaking point, a young man stepped out from one of the central tents. His presence alone changed the atmosphere. The mercenaries immediately gave him space, some even stepping back without being told. His blazing red hair drew the eye first, vivid enough to look like living fire. But it was his gaze that carried the real danger. Sharp, defiant, and promising violence to anyone foolish enough to challenge him. Gislin immediately understood that this had to be the leader. The young man confirmed it himself, introducing himself as Kayor, commander of the Cerberus Mercenary Corps. Gislin wasted no time and stated that he had come to make a request. Kayor's response was a growl, demanding to know why someone seeking employment thought it wise to maim his subordinates first. Gislin's answer came back colder, sharper. If Kor was upset because his little attempt at taming a client had failed, then he should remember that tricks like these could get his men killed when used on the wrong opponent. For a split second, Kayor faltered under the sheer chill in Gizlin's stare. But his pride reasserted itself quickly, and he snarled that noble status meant nothing here. He could kill Gizlin, flee the country, and that would be the end of it. Instead of anger, Gizlin laughed. He said he liked Kor's spirit, then got straight to the point. He wanted to hire Cerberus for the development of the Forest of Beasts. That finally broke Kor's rhythm. His disbelief was obvious as he repeated the name of the cursed forest attached to Ferdium. When Gizlin calmly explained that this was his own project as heir to the estate, Kayor burst into loud, mocking laughter. The infamous delinquent Prince of Ferdium wanted to conquer the monster forest? To him it was absurd. Once his laughter subsided, he flatly refused. Dangerous jobs were one thing, but gambling their lives on the whims of an inexperienced noble brat was another. That was when Gizlin's smile sharpened into something provocative. He called Kor more of a coward than he had expected. The insult landed exactly where intended. Kor bristled, and Gizlin pressed further, mocking the irony that a man who boasted of fearing no noble was apparently terrified of a few monsters huddled in the forest. The camp's tension surged again, everyone sensing how close things were to exploding. Kayor's men gripped their weapons. Jillian's hand hovered near his sword, and the air practically vibrated with the promise of blood. Yet after a long moment, Kor forced himself to turn away, dismissing Gizlin as not even worth killing and telling him to pay the treatment fees before leaving. That was when Gizlin dropped the real trap. In a calm voice aimed squarely at Kor's back, he formally requested Moriana's recognition from the leader of the Regressed Mercenary Corps. The reaction was immediate. The mercenaries froze in stunned disbelief, several blurting out whether this noble brat even understood what he had just invoked. Jillian himself was horrified. Moriana's recognition was an ancient mercenary wager, a ritualized death match with only two simple rules. The opponent's arms were bound together inside a tight circle, and they fought using nothing but a single dagger. Mana was forbidden. Stepping outside the circle meant instant defeat, and because dodging was almost impossible in the cramped space, the duel often ended with both combatants dying from their wounds. It was not something sane men chose lightly. Kayor slowly turned back, glaring at Gizlin with murderous intensity. He demanded to know whether a noble truly understood what he was asking for. Gizlin answered without hesitation that if he won, Kayor and his men would follow him. Refusing wasn't an option. Among mercenaries, to reject Moriana's recognition was to publicly admit inferiority. For a leader like Kayor, doing so in front of his already unstable subordinates would shatter his authority instantly. The Mad Dogs themselves, rather than trying to stop it, were visibly thrilled. To them, this was the most entertaining thing they had seen in months. Kayor clenched his teeth, realizing he had been cornered. He accused Gizlin of using a mercenary's ritual to try and steal his position, but Gizlin dismissed the idea with casual contempt. He wasn't interested in running a shabby corps like Cerberus. He simply wanted to prove that he was no spoiled noble brat. And what better way to do that than by beating a mercenary at his own method? That was enough. Kayor agreed, promising that Gizlin would regret it even if it cost him his life. Witnesses were assigned, the circle was drawn, and the preparations began. Jillian could barely contain himself. His face flushed red as he stepped in front of Gizlin, demanding to know what madness had possessed him. He offered to take the duel in his place, knowing all too well just how lethal this wager truly was. Mana couldn't be used, which meant even Jillian's overwhelming advantage would be reduced to raw physical skill and nerve. But Gizlin simply met his eyes and told him this was something he needed to do himself. The conviction in his gaze was so absolute that even Jillian, despite every instinct screaming otherwise, found himself unable to refuse. He stepped back at last, though his resolve only hardened. The moment even a single blade touched his young lord, he was prepared to butcher Kayor and every mercenary in the camp. Inside the circle, Kayor sneered that Gizlin's chance to flee was gone. He boasted that he had survived this wager 5 times already, an absurd number for someone his age, and proof of just how dangerous he truly was. Most mercenaries live their entire careers without ever facing Moriana's recognition once. Kayor had walked away from it 5 times. It was the source of his authority, his legend, and his brutality. But Gizlin only smirked and replied with devastating calm that he had done it over 100 times. For the briefest instant, Kor's confidence cracked. Then the signal rang out. Both daggers moved at once. Kayor's dagger shot forward like a viper, its edge aimed straight for Gizlin's eyes. To everyone watching, it looked like an unavoidable killing blow. Yet Gizlin's head shifted by the smallest possible margin, no more than a breath's width, and the blade sliced through empty air. In the same motion, his own dagger slid into Kayor's side with terrifying precision. The mercenary leader's breath caught in a sharp grunt as pain twisted across his face. Even then, Kayor refused to believe what had just happened. In his mind, it had to be luck, some absurd coincidence that let the young noble evade the strike. Clinging to that thought, Kayor immediately whipped his arm around, driving the dagger toward Gizlin's temple. Again, Gizlin moved as if he had already seen the attack before it was thrown. He leaned back just enough to let the blade skim past, then smoothly rotated his own dagger into a reverse grip. His voice was calm, almost bored, as he told Kor to give it his all. Before Kor could even process the taunt, a line of crimson opened across his arm. The slash was clean, deliberate, and infuriatingly effortless. That was the moment Kor realized the first exchange had not been chance. His jaw tightened as rage began to boil over. He launched himself into a furious barrage, his dagger flashing in relentless arcs, meant to overwhelm Gizlin through sheer ferocity. But every strike meant nothing. Gizlin's movements were impossibly economical. Every tilt of the shoulder, every turn of the wrist, every slight shift of the hips conserving energy while dismantling Kor's rhythm. Worse, every failed attack left Kayor open for another cut. One wound became 3, then 5, then too many to count. Driven into frustration, Kayor suddenly jerked hard on the arm bound to Gizlin's, intending to wrench him off balance and expose his throat. It was a clever use of the duel's brutal constraints, exactly the kind of dirty ingenuity that had let Kayor survive 5 of these death wagers before. But Gizlin moved with eerie fluidity, flowing with the pull instead of resisting it. He used Kayor's own strength to stabilize himself, pivoting with the motion so naturally it looked less like combat and more like a perfected art. While avoiding the throat strike, his dagger carved another crimson slash across Kor's chest. By now, the mercenaries watching were openly stunned. From the outside, they could appreciate what Kayor, trapped inside the exchange, could not fully grasp. Gizlin's technique was not flashy in the way of mana users or knights showing brute force. It was something colder and more terrifying, the distilled efficiency of countless life and death battles. Men muttered in disbelief, wondering how someone so young could move like that without using mana, questioning whether even trained knights could replicate those techniques. Their voices buzzed with awe, but Jillian heard none of it. He had been ready to intervene the instant Kayor gained an opening, his hand clenched around the hilt of his sword with mana already coiling beneath the skin. But somewhere along the way, that grip had loosened without him realizing. He found himself simply staring, mesmerized by the flow of Gizlin's body. To Jillian, this was no matter of raw genius. Genius was instinctive brilliance, the flash of talent that let someone grasp the impossible. What Gizlin displayed was something far more disturbing. Battle wisdom layered upon battle wisdom. The kind of experience that only came from surviving innumerable real fights. Every feint, every angle, every counter carried the weight of years. That was what left Jillian so shaken. Where could a young noble possibly have acquired the kind of accumulated experience etched into every movement? Inside the circle, Kor's situation only worsened. The repeated sounds of tearing cloth and stifled groans overlapped in brutal rhythm as Gizlin's dagger found flesh again and again. Kor's attacks never connected, while Gizlin's cuts spread methodically across his arm, shoulder, chest, and side. Soon, Kor's dagger hand was slick with blood, trembling so badly that his posture itself began to collapse. He stared at Gizlin in disbelief, unable to reconcile the composed noble before him with the absurd level of skill on display. Still, Kayor had one thing left, his killer's instinct for vital points. Even wounded, he raised his blade again, aiming for the exact weak spots that had ended countless fights for him before. It was his specialty, the ability to finish battles with a single precise thrust. Yet every time he lunged, Gizlin was already gone. One final attempt met the cold clang of steel as Gizlin blocked it effortlessly, Then came the words that shattered Kor's confidence even more than the words. Focusing only on vital points, Ghislain told him, was a habit even beasts could learn. The insult was sharpened by the lesson that followed. Ghislain's dagger moved in a blur, striking Kayor's body in every direction, side, shoulder, chest, abdomen, but never once touching the fatal spot. Each cut was deliberate, proving that Ghislain could have ended the duel at any moment and had instead chosen not to. By the time Kor's arm finally fell limp, blood dripping from too many wounds to count, the only thing still standing strong was the fire in his eyes. Ghislain nodded in genuine approval. Kor's grit was worthy of praise, especially the fact that he had not once cheated by using mana. Even bleeding out, Kor snarled that it wasn't over and swore he would still kill him. Ghislain responded with a sneer, pointing out that one more stab would be enough to finish him. Then to everyone's shock, Ghislain casually tossed his dagger behind him. Kayor froze, confusion overriding pain. Why discard the weapon now, at the exact moment victory was certain? His pride flared into outrage. He demanded to know if Ghislain was mocking him, shouting that the duel wasn't over until one of them surrendered or died. Ghislain scratched his ear as if mildly inconvenienced, then calmly replied that he had no intention of ending it either. Before Kayor could finish asking why, Ghislain's fist smashed into his temple. The punch landed with a brutal thud, staggering Kayor sideways. Even dazed, Kayor's reflexes were monstrous. His dagger lashed out instantly, but Ghislain caught his wrist, twisted, and snapped the joint with a sickening crack. The dagger slipped free. Ghislain kicked it into the air, caught it cleanly, and sliced through the rope binding them together. The sudden release sent Kayor stumbling backward under the force he had still been exerting against the restraint. It was only a few steps, but it carried him outside the ring. The realization hit him instantly. By the rules, stepping outside the circle meant defeat. Kayor spat a mouthful of blood and forced a smirk, deciding to salvage what dignity he could. He claimed it was simple bad luck, an accidental step beyond the boundary, and declared his concession with as much swagger as he could muster. It was the cleanest face-saving exit possible. He had not died, nor had he willingly surrendered. But Ghislain's fist was already pulling back again. The next punch exploded into Kayor's crossed arms and sent him flying backward through the dirt. He barely managed to rise before another blow hammered into him. Kayor protested that the rules clearly stated stepping out ended the duel, but Ghislain laughed the idea off entirely. Rules, he said, meant nothing on a battlefield. He fought when he wanted, and he hit when he felt like hitting. At that moment, the realization dawned on Kayor with horrifying clarity. The so-called Mad Dog had encountered someone far crazier than himself. What followed was less a duel and more a merciless correction. Kayor threw himself forward in rage, but every attack passed through empty space as Ghislain's body blurred just out of reach. It was like trying to strike smoke. Every miss earned him another devastating punch. Ghislain declared that the only medicine for a mad dog was a beating, and then he delivered that medicine without restraint. Punch after punch drove Kor deeper into delirium. His thoughts unraveled into fragments. First outrage, then confusion, then the absurd memory of his dead grandmother waiting somewhere in the haze, smiling as if she had come to greet him. The mercenaries watching swallowed nervously, muttering that even Kayor might actually die at this rate. They wondered aloud if someone should stop it, but none of them dared step in. That hesitation was exactly what Ghislain had intended. Men like these respected only overwhelming dominance. If he wanted the Mad Dogs to obey, Kayor needed to be broken in front of them all. Finally, when Ghislain saw the nostalgic, half-lucid look in Kayor's eyes, he judged the lesson complete. He stepped back with a nod. Kayor collapsed face first into the dirt. The mercenaries rushed over, checking his pulse and breathing. Their grim verdict was that he was done for, breathing too shallowly to last. Yet Ghislain only turned calmly to Jillian and told him to bring the person he had called earlier. Moments later, Jillian returned carrying a priest on his back. Only now did it become clear that Ghislain had arranged for divine healing in advance, paying heavily to keep the priest waiting nearby. The wounds began closing under holy power, and the mercenaries stared in awe as they realized every stab, every cut, every punch had been calculated to avoid fatal damage, while still breaking Kyor completely. When Kyor finally woke, his first groggy whisper was a confused call for his grandmother. Ghislain crouched beside him with a relaxed smile and told him to get a grip. Then, in the same casual tone, he said he would appreciate signing the contract today because he was busy. Kyor slowly dragged himself upright, staring at Ghislain as if seeing a devil wearing a noble's face. Whatever resistance remained inside him had been beaten clean out. He scratched his head, spat into the dirt, and muttered that they should write it now. Ghislain's smile deepened with satisfaction. That was the moment the Cerberus Mercenary Corps, the infamous Mad Dogs of the North, became his. Long before dawn painted the eastern sky, the open ground behind the Zimbar Mercenary Guild was already thick with noise, breath mist, and the restless shifting of armed men. More than 100 mercenaries had gathered in the cold half-light, boots grinding against frost-hardened earth, as they traded rumors in low, amused voices. Their employer, they had heard, was none other than the spoiled young lord of Ferdium, a reckless, noble brat with more pride than sense. To seasoned sellswords, that kind of employer was less a commander and more an opportunity. The mood among them carried that familiar blend of laziness and calculation that always came when professionals smelled easy money. Most of them had never met Ghislain, but it only took a handful of men who knew the local gossip for the entire gathering to form an opinion. The story spread quickly through the crowd. The young lord was inexperienced. His father was often away at the northern front, and the estate itself was poor enough that no one expected strong oversight. By the time the whispers circled the clearing, many of the mercenaries had already decided this would be one of those comfortable jobs where they could put on a convincing show, collect their coin, and retreat the moment real danger appeared. That was when Gordon stepped forward. He was impossible to miss even in the dim light, a towering bald giant with a chest like a siege ram and shoulders so broad he seemed carved out of a fortress gate. Gordon was already famous among northern mercenaries, less for tactical brilliance and more for his absurd obsession with muscle. He refused alcohol because he claimed it weakened his gains, avoided crying because tears supposedly dried out the body, and treated every free moment as either training or recovery. Men laughed at him, but none of them doubted his raw strength. Planting his boots firmly into the dirt, Gordon flexed his chest with theatrical pride before proposing what everyone was already thinking. If they were going to deal with a rookie noble employer, they needed one representative, a wrangler, someone to speak for the group, apply pressure, and extract better conditions. More coin, easier escape clauses, no penalties if the mission turned ugly. It was standard mercenary politics, the kind of psychological warfare that happened long before swords were drawn. The suggestions spread through the crowd like fire through dry brush. One by one, the mercenaries nodded in agreement, amused by the thought of turning the tables on some clueless noble boy. A few men frowned, clearly uncomfortable with pushing too far, but the majority quickly rallied behind Gordon. Even the leaders of smaller mercenary bands quietly supported the idea. There was little risk and plenty of potential reward. With around 160 armed men gathered, the logic felt simple. If they presented a united front, the employer would have no choice but to bend. No noble brat, no matter how arrogant, could casually manage a mass of hardened mercenaries ready to revolt if pushed. By the time the eastern horizon began to pale, the men were already discussing what conditions they should force into the written contracts. Some wanted guaranteed withdrawal rights if the forest of beasts proved too dangerous. Others insisted the entire place was probably nothing more than exaggerated rumor anyway. A few were clearly planning to vanish the moment they smelled real blood. But whether cautious or greedy, almost all of them shared the same assumption. Their employer would be easy prey. Then the sound of horses emerged from the mist. Two mounted figures appeared first, riding at an unhurried pace through the dawn fog. Behind them came another group of roughly 30 on foot, their shapes little more than silhouettes at first. Gordon laughed under his breath, already preparing himself to play the intimidating representative. The mercenaries around him shifted into place, creeping forward with deliberate menace, hoping to overwhelm the newcomers before a single word was spoken. But then the mist thinned. The laughter died. Gordon's confident grin froze as his eyes locked onto the faces behind the riders. His breath caught in his throat. The Mad Dogs. The name alone was enough to turn the clearing rigid. The Regressed Mercenary Corps stepped through the morning haze like a nightmare made flesh, their presence instantly draining the bravado from every man gathered there. Even among mercenaries, these men carried a reputation that bordered on myth. Reckless, violent, efficient, and utterly devoid of fear. They were the kind of fighters no sane sellsword wanted to clash with, not because they were unbeatable, but because any fight against them guaranteed a butcher's bill on both sides. Gordon's mouth went dry. Ghislain rode straight toward him, the horse's hooves tapping against the earth with almost mocking leisure. Looking down from the saddle, he studied Gordon once, then smirked. "So you're the one hurting these fools?" The words hit harder than a slap. When Gordon stammered out his name, Ghislain chuckled softly, dismissed him as simple-minded, and rode right past. To him, the mercenary's positioning had been obvious from the start. In another life, he had led men through the same games, applied the same pressure, used the same tricks. Seeing it from the receiving end now felt almost nostalgic rather than threatening. Corps followed close behind, and the moment Gordon saw the Mad Dog leader's cold stare, whatever little defiance remained inside him crumbled. One of Corps' men casually reminded him to lower his gaze, and after a moment's hesitation, Gordon did exactly that. The effect on the rest of the mercenaries was immediate. The entire mood of the clearing shifted from scheming confidence to uneasy caution. Why were the Mad Dogs escorting the employer? Why did Kayor himself seem tense every time the young lord made the slightest movement? Those questions spread faster than the earlier gossip ever had. The men who had come prepared to pressure Ghislain now realized that any open resistance would almost certainly provoke a clash with Cerberus, and no one liked the odds of that outcome. Ghislain dismounted and took a seat in the clearing, as if this were already his camp, crossing one leg over the other, while the Cerberus Corps arranged themselves behind him like personal guards. The sight alone was enough to make seasoned mercenaries swallow their pride. Then came the contracts. The guild manager emerged at precisely the right moment, handing out written agreements while formally introducing Ghislain as the young lord of Ferdium. For a brief moment, the gathered mercenaries hesitated again, still uncertain whether binding themselves to a force that included the Mad Dogs was wisdom or suicide. Then Gordon stepped forward. Too proud to let his earlier fear define him, he slapped his seal onto the contract without even glancing at the contents. Ghislain tilted his head. "You're not going to read it?" Before Gordon could answer, the guild manager burst into laughter and explained the truth. Gordon couldn't read it all. His brain, apparently, was all muscle. Whatever job was placed in front of him and whatever payment was promised, he simply accepted it on trust. The clearing erupted in laughter. Gordon, red-faced and furious, defended himself with the bizarre logic that studying would somehow reduce his muscles. The guild manager mocked him mercilessly, but Ghislain only watched with an amused smile. In Gordon, he saw something oddly familiar. He had led countless men like this before, simple, honest fighters whose bodies outran their education, but whose loyalty, once earned, could outlast kingdoms. So he gave Gordon a casual promise. When this was all over, if there was time, someone would teach him. The bald giant's face lit up with such genuine gratitude that even the surrounding mercenaries seemed momentarily disarmed. That simple exchange broke the remaining hesitation. One by one, the others stepped forward and sealed their contracts as well. If the Cerberus Corps was truly under Ghislain's command, then whatever dangers waited in the Forest of Beasts suddenly seemed far less terrifying. A few smaller groups with personal grudges against the Mad Dogs quietly withdrew. But by the end of the process, the guild manager reported a total of 148 mercenaries. With Cerberus included, the force now numbered nearly 180 men. It was not merely an expeditionary party anymore. It was the beginning of a military operation. Ghislain rose and addressed them all with calm authority, introducing himself formally and promising a full explanation once they reached Ferdium's borders. Supplies were purchased, horses rented for those without mounts, and enough provisions secured to sustain a field encampment. Then the column moved. The sight of nearly 200 armed mercenaries marching across the roads sent common folks scattering from their path in fear. But to Ghislain, the sound of rough voices, clanking gear, and restless banter stirred something deeper. Memory. Once he had crossed entire continents at the head of mercenary armies like this. Once this had been his world. As the column approached Ferdium's borderlands, he left the mercenaries waiting outside the estate to avoid unnecessary conflict with the retainers. With only Jillian beside him, he rode ahead to meet Belinda. She had everything ready, just as expected. But beneath her efficient report lay worry. More than half of Amelia's 20,000 gold had already been consumed by preparations. Laborers, materials, food, transport, and now mercenary contracts. By any rational estimate, they were bleeding money far too quickly for a project as dangerous as pioneering the Forest of Beasts. Belinda finally snapped, frustration breaking through her usual composure. Over 10,000 gold had already vanished, and the true construction had not even begun. At this rate, they would run out of funds long before the forest yielded anything. Ghislain listened without interruption. Then, as the tension peaked, his lips curled into that same strange, unreadable smile. "It's fine," he said calmly. "We're not going to pioneer the forest." The moment Ghislain said they were not going to pioneer the entire forest, the room seemed to freeze. For a heartbeat, nobody even reacted, as if the meaning of his words had failed to register. Then Belinda's face went blank with disbelief, the kind of expression people wore when reality itself suddenly stopped making sense. She had spent years watching this boy grow, patching up his disasters, cleaning up after his reckless whims, and somehow convincing herself that he had finally matured. But now, staring at him across the table, she felt that fragile hope crumble. This was not maturity. This was madness wrapped in confidence. Jillian felt the same unease. He had followed Ghislain this far out of loyalty, respect, and a growing belief that beneath the young lord's recklessness lay something deeper. But hearing this abrupt turn made even him step in. He carefully pointed out that the remaining gold, though diminished, was still enough to become a foundation for future plans. If they preserved it, they could rebuild elsewhere, invest in something safer, or at the very least avoid complete ruin. Even Kaor, who usually found amusement in chaos, tilted his head with a skeptical grin. To him, this entire expedition had been half insanity and half entertainment. But even he knew the line between daring and suicide. Ghislain, however, only nodded as if he had expected every word. Then instead of arguing, he summoned Kor closer and unfolded a rough map across the table. The parchment crackled under his fingers as he pointed toward the Forest of Beasts. The forest itself was little more than an ominous shape on the map, its boundaries uncertain, its interior unknown. With deliberate calm, Ghislain traced a line from the nearest edge inward, then sharply bent it toward a single point. "We're not clearing the whole forest," he explained. "That would be impossible right now. We only need the fastest route to one target." The others leaned closer, their expressions shifting from disbelief to confusion. This was not pioneering in the traditional sense. There would be no broad clearing of land, no systematic expansion, no attempt to secure the entire region. Instead, Ghislain intended to cut a narrow spear straight into the heart of the woods, bypassing everything else in pursuit of something specific. Belinda stared at the marked point on the map. And what exactly is supposed to be there? Ghislain's lips curved into a smile that made everyone in the room even more uneasy. "Something that will make us rich." Silence followed. To them, it sounded absurd. The Forest of Beasts was a place people feared even in rumor. Explorers entered and vanished. Previous lords of Ferdium had abandoned all attempts at meaningful expansion. Yet Ghislain was calmly pointing at an arbitrary location on an incomplete map and speaking as if he had already seen the treasure waiting there. Jillian, forcing himself to remain rational, asked the obvious question. How could Ghislain possibly know what lay inside a forest no one had ever survived exploring? For the first time, Ghislain hesitated. He almost told them the truth. The words even slipped halfway out before Belinda slammed her hand against the table, cutting him off in exasperation. His brief attempt to explain that he had died once and returned was met exactly as expected, with disbelief, anger, and the absolute certainty that he was avoiding the real answer. So Ghislain sighed inwardly and did what he had expected to do from the start. He lied. He told them it was based on a rumor. Rare herbs, hidden resources, buried wealth. Stories like these had always clung to the Forest of Beasts. Adventurers and fools had thrown away their lives chasing whispers of fortune. To Belinda and Jillian, it sounded like Ghislain had simply fallen victim to the same temptation. Kayor, meanwhile, burst into open laughter. To him, this only made the young lord even more entertaining. Defying his father, draining half the estate's hidden funds, hiring nearly 200 mercenaries and gambling it all on a rumor? Even among madmen, that was a level of insanity worthy of admiration. But Ghislain didn't laugh. His expression turned firm, almost severe. "This isn't about conquering the whole forest yet," he said. "That will come later. Right now, we only need quick profit. We take the most valuable and easily liquidated resource first, turn it into money, and use that money to expand further. That's how we make the forest pay for its own conquest." This time, his explanation carried a cold logic none of them could completely dismiss. It wasn't blind pioneering. It was surgical extraction. A single strike for immediate wealth. Belinda still hated it. Every instinct in her screamed that this was reckless, dangerous, and likely to end with Ghislain dragged back in chains, or worse, dead somewhere beneath the trees. Jillian felt no better, but both of them had now seen the steel in Ghislain's eyes, the kind that didn't belong to a spoiled heir chasing a fantasy. It was the look of a man who had already weighed failure and accepted death as part of the equation. Kayor, on the other hand, simply shrugged. If the young lord wanted to bet his future on madness, the mad dogs would at least be paid to witness it. Inside, Ghislain's confidence came from a truth he could never share. This was not a rumor. It was memory. In his previous life, after the kingdom's collapse, the Delphine Duchy had poured enormous resources into the Forest of Beasts. At first, even Ghislain had not understood why they were so obsessed with that cursed woodland. But over time, while investigating ways to undermine them, he had obtained fragments of their maps and records, enough to learn the locations of the forest's most profitable resource veins. The point he had marked on the map was the nearest one, the easiest to extract, the fastest to turn into liquid wealth. The duchy had once used it to build a fortune. Now he would steal that future for Ferdium. That realization hardened his resolve even further. This was not merely about money. It was about buying time. Time for the estate, time for his family, time to prepare for the larger storm he knew was coming. Once the meeting ended, the camp outside the estate transformed into a machine of urgent preparation. Jillian drilled the mercenaries constantly, keeping them disciplined and too busy to start fights among themselves. Belinda oversaw the workers as they constructed the temporary base, all while battling the exhaustion and dread that gnawed at her. Dark circles deepened beneath her eyes as sleepless nights piled up, each one haunted by visions of Ghislain disappearing into the forest and never returning. The more she worried, the darker her thoughts became. Eventually, she found herself laying out poisons and sedatives, carefully choosing which one might knock Ghislain unconscious without killing him. If the expedition turned hopeless, she had already decided she would stab him herself, drag him out, and deal with the consequences later. Even that desperate plan showed how deeply she cared. Ghislain, meanwhile, felt the weight of it all more than anyone. Outwardly, he remained calm, but inwardly the pressure was suffocating. The Forest of Beasts was no myth. Even the mighty Delphine Duchy had suffered repeated failures there in its previous life, and they had possessed resources beyond anything Ferdium could dream of. His only true advantage was knowledge. Maps, routes, memories, and even those were imperfect. He knew better than anyone that reality never obeyed information perfectly. Terrain shifted, monsters migrated. Unforeseen variables turned brilliant strategies into mass graves. Still, after reviewing every angle, every route, every possible disaster, he had reached the same conclusion again and again. This was still their best chance. Not the safest chance, not the easiest, but the only one fast enough. When Belinda and Jillian finally returned with their reports, both of them had originally planned to argue one last time. Yet the moment they saw Ghislaine's face, the words died in their throats. The playful young master they knew was gone. In his place stood someone colder. Someone who looked as if he had already accepted the possibility of dying in that forest. Belinda quietly reported that the camp was ready for basic lodging and supply operations. Jillian added that the mercenaries were trained and the estate's retainers had begun mobilizing soldiers in response to their suspicious activity. Ghislaine listened in silence. Then, after a long breath, he rose slowly from his seat. The bitter smile on his face carried equal parts exhaustion and determination. "You're right," he said. "We can't wait any longer." For him, everything now came down to one truth. If this gamble succeeded, Ferdium would gain not just wealth, but breathing room. Time. The one thing he had always lacked. His gaze sharpened. "Gather the mercenaries." The moment Ghislaine's command rang out, the entire mercenary force moved with surprising speed. Armor plates clinked. Boots thudded against the half-cleared earth. And within moments, nearly 200 armed men had formed rough but disciplined ranks around him. The short days of drilling under Jillian had clearly left their mark. Their lines were not perfect, but there was order. And in a place like this, even imperfect order could mean the difference between life and death. Without wasting another breath, Ghislaine led them toward the hastily built base camp near the edge of the Forest of Beasts, his sharp eyes sweeping over the unfinished structures. The camp still lacked polish, little more than a skeleton of wooden frames, supply tents, and cooking fires. But it was enough to sustain men for a few days. It would have been wiser to wait until everything was complete, yet wisdom was a luxury time no longer allowed. The estate's vassals had already come snooping too many times, suspicion growing heavier with every excuse Belinda was forced to invent. Even the laborers had begun whispering among themselves. If they delayed further, the entire plan would collapse before it even began. Standing before the gathered mercenaries, Ghislaine raised his voice so it carried over every helm and shoulder. He warned them plainly that the forest rumors were true enough to kill the careless. He told them survival depended on discipline, on following his exact orders, and on resisting the temptation to wander or act independently. The guards stationed at the forest entrance stared in disbelief as this heavily armed column assembled before them. To them, the sight was surreal. Mercenaries, carts, lamps, axes, and the young lord himself standing at the front as though he were marching into a territorial war. A few tried to protest, but their objections were swallowed by the sheer size of the expedition. Just before stepping into the shadowed mouth of the forest, Ghislaine paused. For a fleeting moment, he closed his eyes, letting the weight of the decision settle over him. He knew better than anyone what success here would mean. If Ferdium suddenly began drawing wealth and strength from the Forest of Beasts, it would not remain a secret for long. The surrounding lords would notice. The Delphine Duchy, above all, would eventually turn its eyes this way. In many ways, this march was less an expedition and more a declaration that Ferdium intended to seize its own future. It was dangerous. It was reckless. It might very well accelerate the very threats he hoped to prepare against. But stopping now would only guarantee ruin. So he opened his eyes again, the hesitation gone, and raised his hand forward. Before he could give the final signal, a frantic voice tore through the clearing. Skoban came running toward them, breath ragged, his face pale with alarm. The former hero of the orc hunt, now reduced to guarding this forsaken place, looked almost desperate as he reached Ghislaine. He demanded to know whether the young lord truly intended to enter the forest. Ghislaine answered with calm certainty that he did. When Skoban stammered about the lord's explicit orders, Ghislaine cut through his protest with a favor instead. He reminded Skoban of the wealth and survival they had once shared during the orc campaign, then pressed him for loyalty one more time. What he needed was simple in words and dangerous in consequence. Time. The sentries must keep quiet, the reports must be delayed, and the estate soldiers must not be allowed to pursue immediately. If the vassals marched after them now, The entire operation would devolve into chaos before they reached the resource point. Scoven's first instinct was refusal. If the lie unraveled, he would be dragged down with Gislen. Yet when he looked into the young lord's eyes, he saw the same terrifying confidence from the orc hunt, the same look that had once led them through overwhelming odds without losing a single man. Against his better judgment, his head nodded before his mind could stop it. Gislen accepted that silent agreement with satisfaction, praising his decisiveness before moving on. Ricardo, now Scoven's deputy, arrived moments later and nearly panicked when he heard where they were going. Gislen dismissed his worries with the same infuriating ease as before, assuring him that they would return before any disaster spilled outward. Whether Ricardo believed him or not hardly mattered. The expedition was already moving. Then, at last, they crossed the threshold. The forest of beasts did not seem frightening at first. At the outer edge, it resembled any ordinary woodland. Small animals darted through brush, insects chirped from unseen places, and the air carried the cool scent of damp soil. Some of the mercenaries even began to wonder if the terrifying rumors had been exaggerated by frightened villagers. But that illusion vanished the deeper they marched. The forest changed with almost unnatural speed. The insects fell silent first, their constant hum snuffed out so completely that the sudden quiet felt oppressive. Then the trees themselves began to change, trunks thickening until they resembled pillars, branches spreading so wide that their leaves sealed the sky above. Daylight disappeared beneath a suffocating green-black canopy. Fog clung low to the ground, refusing to disperse even under what should have been the warmth of midday. When Gislen ordered the lamps lit, several mercenaries grumbled under their breath. Lamps were far more expensive than torches, and Gislen had insisted on bringing hundreds of them, along with sealed crates whose contents no one yet understood. To many of the men, it seemed like another example of noble wastefulness. Yet once the warm circles of light flickered to life, illuminating only fragments of the endless darkness around them, the complaints quieted. Every man suddenly understood why fire alone would not be enough in a place where the very air seemed to swallow brightness. Soon the faint traces of old passage vanished, and the path ahead became nothing but untouched wilderness. Gislen gave the next order without hesitation. Cut the trees, clear the brush, and carve a road where none existed. This was the spear-thrust road he had envisioned, the fastest line toward the hidden resource point. To the mercenaries' surprise, Gillen himself stepped forward with an axe and began chopping alongside them. Instead of inspiring awe, it drew laughter. They mocked the image of a noble heir doing laborer's work, joking that he was simply overexcited and playing at being a commoner. Only the Cerberus Corps remained silent, their expressions unreadable. They knew from bitter experience that when Gislen personally involved himself in something, it never ended in simple theatrics. Belinda approached him with open frustration, asking why he insisted on swinging an axe when he had hired nearly 200 men for precisely that purpose. Gislen answered simply that speed mattered more than dignity. Every extra tree felled by his own hand meant the path advanced faster. She muttered bitterly that the young master she once knew would not even bathe himself, let alone chop timber. And Gislen could only awkwardly dismiss the memory as something he would rather forget. Even while the work continued, his mind never left the journal etched into his memory. Every landmark, every shift in the forest atmosphere, every note about monster behavior was being silently cross-checked against the terrain around him. He trusted the old Delphine records, but trust was not certainty. If even one critical detail had changed over the years, this carefully calculated expedition could turn into a massacre. For a while, the labor itself began to ease the men's nerves. Sunlight filtered weakly through the openings created by the felled trees, and the mercenaries' chatter grew louder again. Some even joked that they almost felt guilty accepting hazard pay for nothing more than forestry work. The mood lightened, their pace quickened. For a brief stretch, it felt as though the terrifying forest might truly be nothing more than rumor. Then Gislen stopped. The shift in him was immediate and absolute. His axe lowered, his eyes narrowed, every instinct sharpened. He ordered everyone to prepare for battle. The mercenaries looked around in confusion. There was no sound, no movement, no visible enemy. Even Jillian, whose senses had once detected hidden assassins with ease, felt nothing unusual, yet Gislin's expression remained grim. Slowly, carefully, he told them to back away from the line of trees ahead without turning their backs. When Jillian quietly asked what they were supposed to fear, Gislin's gaze fixed on the thick vines coiled around the trunks before them. A line from the journal surfaced in his memory with perfect clarity. The area where the trees were strangled in thick living cords. Even Count Balzac, a sword master famed for sensing killing intent, had reportedly failed to notice the danger until it was too late. Gislin's voice dropped into something colder than fear. "They aren't hiding," he said. "The danger is what's right in front of us." The moment Gislin warned that the danger was right in front of them, confusion rippled through the mercenary ranks like a murmur before a storm. Several of the less disciplined men immediately laughed it off, their voices carrying mockery instead of caution. To them, the young lord's tension looked like cowardice, another sign that this noble heir was playing commander in a place far beyond his understanding. A few even strode past him with axes resting on their shoulders, grinning as though they were humoring a frightened child. They joked that the employer had finally gotten cold feet, that there was nothing ahead except more trees, and that this kind of work was exactly why he had hired hardened mercenaries in the first place. Their arrogance spread easily. Outside the Cerberus Corps, very few had truly taken Gislin's warning seriously. Most stood idle, watching him as though the whole thing were an overblown performance. Gislin's voice cut through the mockery like steel. He ordered them to stop, and though they hesitated, the edge in his tone was enough to make them obey. He told them again, slowly, clearly, to back away from the vine-wrapped trees, because staying there meant death. The men frowned, unable to grasp what he was seeing, but the tension in his face finally bled into the mood around them. Weapons began to rise, shields shifted. Even the mockers started to humor him, if only because the atmosphere had changed too sharply to ignore. Then everything happened at once. The thick vines coiled around the towering trunks suddenly twisted with violent life, spinning into motion like a nest of serpents awakened. Before anyone could properly react, they shot forward with terrifying speed. The first lash came for a mercenary's throat, and only Gislin's body, already moving before anyone else understood the danger, intercepted it. His sword flashed in a clean silver arc, severing the vines so sharply that black, tar-like liquid sprayed from the cut. Shock exploded across the mercenary's face. Before he could even process what had nearly happened, a second vine lunged from the darkness toward another man, and Gislin cut that one down too. But there were too many. Dozens of vines lashed from every direction, a rain of living cords striking faster than human eyes could comfortably follow. Several mercenaries screamed as the vines wrapped around their limbs and torsos, yanking them violently off their feet and dragging them toward the silent wall of trees. Gislin hurled the men he had just saved backward toward the safer ranks and lunged deeper into the chaos, determined to intercept the captured ones. Yet even he was forced to halt as the vines surged together in a writhing barrier, blocking his path from all sides. He leapt. His body spun in midair with terrifying precision, and his sword carved a full crescent around him, slicing apart every vine that had tried to cage him in. The severed pieces rained down like dead snakes, splattering black fluid across the roots below. He landed lightly, sliding back into formation just as Belinda, Jillian, and Kaor rushed to his side. The screams ahead grew worse. The mercenaries who had been dragged away were now pressed helplessly against the trunks themselves. At first, the others could only stare, frozen by incomprehension. Then the bark split open. Grotesque, mouth-like openings tore themselves across the tree trunks, jagged and crushing rather than natural, like wounds forced into wood. One by one, the trapped mercenaries were shoved into those maws. Bones cracked, flesh tore. Their screams were swallowed beneath the wet, splintering sounds of trees chewing living prey. The entire formation staggered backward in horror. Some of the mercenaries whispered that they were Ents, but Gislin dismissed that thought instantly. True Ents were ancient guardians, peaceful beings of the forest that preserved life rather than devoured it. These things were something far fouler. As the trunks finished swallowing the screaming men, cracks opened higher up in the bark, revealing black, hateful eyes staring from within. That was when the name from the journal surfaced in Gislin's memory. Regressed Mercenary. The ancient expedition records had described them as the true gatekeepers of the Forest of Beasts. Monsters that masqueraded as part of the forest itself until prey wandered too close. Even Count Balzac, the sword master who had once led a royal advance force into these woods, had reportedly failed to sense them before the ambush began. Entire units had been erased before anyone understood that the trees themselves were the predators. Now, because Gislin had recognized the warning signs early, they had a chance those earlier expeditions never did. The Regressed let out a horrifying chorus of shrieks as they uprooted themselves. Massive roots twisted together into crude legs, dragging their immense bodies forward, while branch-like limbs unfurled into long arms lined with whipping vines. What had once seemed like part of the forest now towered before the mercenaries as grotesque living siege weapons. Gislin barked orders immediately, forcing the front line to raise their shields. The first barrage of vines crashed into them with monstrous force. Men groaned as shields buckled, some thrown backward, others slammed to the ground under the sheer strength of the impact. The creatures were colossal, and their power matched their size. Arrows flew from the rear, but the shafts bounced harmlessly off the thick bark exteriors. Panic started to spread. To the mercenaries, it felt as though they were fighting the forest itself. Then Gislin gave the order that horrified everyone. Throw the lanterns. Belinda and Jillian both reacted instantly, shouting that he had to be insane. Fire inside the Forest of Beasts was the one thing no lord had ever dared risk. If the woods burned, monsters would flood outward in every direction, and Ferdium itself could be overrun. It was the kind of disaster that could erase the estate in a single night. But Gislin's confidence never wavered. He hurled the first lantern himself, shattering it against the Regressed's trunk and drenching the bark in oil. Then he shouted for the archers to ready fire arrows. The mercenaries hesitated only for a heartbeat before survival overrode caution. Lantern after lantern shattered across the monsters, oil splashing over bark and vines. When the fire arrows followed, the Regressed erupted in flame. Their shrieks became almost unbearable. The towering monsters stumbled and writhed, fire racing along their oil-soaked bark. Even the rear ranks of Regressed that tried to advance through the blaze were met with more burning lanterns and arrows, turning the battlefield into a ring of towering infernos. For one desperate moment, it seemed Gislin's gamble had worked perfectly. Then the steam began. At first, it rose in harmless, white plumes, but soon the mercenaries realized with dawning horror that the flames were not spreading. They were disappearing. The fire was being drawn inward, swallowed by the burning creatures themselves. The smoke and vapor thickened, obscuring everything until the forest became a suffocating white haze. When it cleared, the mercenaries' courage nearly shattered. The bark exteriors had burned away, revealing the Regressed's true bodies beneath. Their inner flesh was not wood at all, but slick, black, moist tissue that gleamed like tar-coated muscle. Hollow eyes sank deep into their forms, and rows of sharp teeth glistened inside the mouths split across their torsos. They were no longer monstrous trees. They were something worse. Even the embers scattered on the ground vanished the moment their new flesh touched them, extinguished as if the fire itself had been devoured. The mercenaries recoiled, terror replacing every trace of bravado. Fire, the natural weakness of trees, had only stripped away the false shell and revealed the far deadlier truth beneath. Men began muttering that this place was cursed, that they should never have entered, that if the very first monsters were like this, then the deeper horrors of the forest would be beyond comprehension. Yet in the middle of their fear, Gislin smiled. Not because the situation was easy, because this was exactly what he had been waiting for. The journal had described it perfectly. The outer bark was nearly impervious to ordinary weapons, but vulnerable to fire. The inner flesh, however, was resistant to even powerful fire magic. Yet it lost the armor-like protection of bark and became vulnerable to steel. Gislin's grin sharpened. "Their flesh looks soft now," he said, his tone almost amused. The mercenaries stared